Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I'd like to welcome our guest today for this special Q&A session, John McLaughlin, who I'm going to do a bit of an introduction for first before we move into some questions. I think I've got to talk a little bit about how much stuff John has actually done. He has been a part-time model. He's been a skateboarding and breakdancing champion with national level credits. He's got some acting credits. And of course, he's also, I guess, big part of today is about John being a former Mr. Universe. In 2010, John finally became, he lived his dream, which we'll get to a little bit later. And now he's also an author, got 2 books under his belt, and indeed is exploring a 3rd book and possibly a screenplay we'll talk about again a little bit later too. So welcome, John. It's great to have you with us. Much of all of this stuff that I just mentioned is actually explored in your first book, Living the Nightmare, Becoming the Dream. Could you tell us a little bit more about this book and indeed why you wanted to write it?
Right, well, when I finished with bodybuilding, I always thought there was good stories to come out of it. It seemed too good, even when you was going through even the young things like the breaking, the skating, and then when you're in the bodybuilding, it was almost like you had your own Venice Beach. You were almost part of them great times where you actually looked at everyone like they were your idols, you know what I mean? And when I finished, I was hoping that someone would come out of nowhere and say, let's write your story, let's put something together from back in the day, but unfortunately it never happened. So, because I was a big fan of film, I thought I'd love to be able to do something that made it into some form of film. But I wasn't very good at writing. I never really studied much at school, so it was a bit of a dead void. And then a couple of years down the line, I just kept putting story into my head and the story, and so I was almost writing it in my head. And then the idea from the film slipped when someone bought me a book, and it was about Rob Lowe's life. And I really got into it, I really enjoyed it, and I thought a book could be better than a film. And then there was a guy who wrote a book who struggled a lot with reading, writing, a lot of other stuff, and he talked about ghost writers, just write it as you say it, spell check, everything. And bit by bit there was a possibility that this book could be written. And then a friend of mine named George, he just kept saying, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. And then that was it really. The final straw was I was watching Jackie Collins on TV, and they asked her what advice do you give anyone writing a book. And she said, if it's about a person's life, to start at the earliest memory, keep working forward, don't worry if it's not all quite in sync. If you only do an hour a day or write 1 page a day, by the end of the year you'll have an elaborate book. And that was it. And then from the next day I started taking notes, started pen and paper on lap, and then unfortunately after a boxing session I threw my water into the back of the car and all my notes and everything were destroyed. But ironically at the time I thought there was more to do with the bodybuilding story than, like, I've watched a lot of doers and all the skateboarding, and I thought there's too much, so you need to put it into 2 stories. So it did me a favour, you know, like the second book's about things happening for a reason. And then I thought I've got to get a computer. And once I got a computer and a PC, got a bit of time aside, it had the spell check, it had different things, it had little blue lines and stuff where that's wrong, that's right, and you start to learn to write, you start putting it together, and then you start making it interesting. And with the bodybuilding one, it was a lot easier because it goes boom, 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 in a small story that means something, to something that's a bigger story, to bigger stories, and it's got a happy ending and everything works nicely. So that's where I started, and then I found a love for it then. And then I thought, even if I wanted to do a screenplay or a film or a series later on, I've got the story in place for when it is. So it was always going to be one book, then another book later on. So that's how it came about.
So tell us about the title, this Living the Nightmare, Becoming the Dream. What's that all about?
Well, it's about, I mean, if we're talking about the 80s movies and all that, like when you watch an 80s film, it's very simplistic when you first watch it. And it's about, you see the final result all the time. There's no depth to it really. And the dream is to have this physique, to be something good, to see the picture that you want, the guy, the girl, the life, everything's got to be perfect, you know what I mean? And that's the dream, it's easy. And the nightmare is what comes to get to that dream. And as you're watching these films, they don't mean anything to you at the beginning, you just love them. All you've seen is Rocky win, all you've seen is Arnold with a log on his shoulder, and you see Dean Youngblood winning the game at the end. But the more setbacks in life to get, you go back to these films and you're watching the setbacks and you're realising the setbacks in the movies are a lot like your life. And the more you do it, the more these setbacks are what really are better than the goals. You're watching these characters, and when you fall in love with the characters, when they're having a hard point, when they've nearly given up, and they make that move to step back up and come back in it, and that was a nightmare. But my nightmare went hellish in a lot of places, you know what I mean? Some through my own fault, some through everything, like people that bring you down, people that hit you hard, and the book had so many different meanings of that was the nightmare part, living through your own nightmares, whether it was falling off the wagon when you left school and getting into drugs and this, that and the other, cleaning yourself up, coming back. When I lost my marriage, that was a nightmare. Living out of my car when I became homeless, fighting back, carrying on with your training. And all the time, all you've got is this little message of this dream that you won't stop, because all these movies have just had this dream at the end of it, and you can't stop till you get it. But you've lost sight of that dream completely, and it's an obsession. You're crazed, you're a different person, you're lost, you're angry, you're causing problems. I mean, I was in a lot of bother for a lot of time, you know what I mean? But I didn't quit till I got that dream, and that's the nightmare part of it.
Okay, thanks, John. So the dream for you obviously was this journey to become Mr. Universe, which, as I said earlier in the introduction, you eventually became Mr. Universe in 2010. What did that feel like, that when you finally got to the dream?
It was a relief because it was over. It was, when I won my first Mr. Bury, that felt great because that was my first title. That was on my home strip, and we'd had such good rivalries from two gyms, but everyone were pretty good. And that almost felt like Venice Beach, California. That was the high point of it. And then when you get to Mr. Britain, that becomes a bit more distant, a bit more challenging. And the more you go up, the more you get competitive rivalry, the more you get people keeping you down, and the more it gets harder. And in the end, with the Mr. Universe, although, I mean, we talk Mr. Universe, but like there's a Mr. Olympia, then an official Mr. Universe, and then there's like a few that are at a smaller level. So like, to be straight, it's at one of the smaller level, and I've only weight to height ratio, but still, at that was me. That weight to height ratio it was just a relief to get it. But what was more important, and what I always said to bodybuilders, I said, get the photo. You know, you never sell out. You know, it was about the physique. It was coming up like that, having perfect proportions, having perfect condition, looking absolutely picture perfect, because in a few years' time, the titles are going to go, they're not going to be seen as important. Everything's going to go, but that picture of you, absolute pinnacle perfection of how you want it to be, that's the dream more than anything. Because you don't look at things and think, look at his trophy collection. You say, look at that guy there. That's it. The dream. He just looks immaculate. That guy doesn't have any problems. And that was the end. So when I finally won the segment of a Mr. Universe competition, it was like getting out of prison free. You know what I mean? I could go free. I'd finished. It was 25 years of training, 21 years of competing, and I looked the way I wanted to look. I presented myself the way I wanted to present myself, and it was over. It was happy. It was complete. It was the end of that film, and then I could start my next kind of movement, my next goals in life. And it was a thing where I could move on. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? As the Mr. Britain was a start, I finally done something. The Mr. Universe was, I finally completed it. I've done what I wanted. And the stars of bodybuilding in the 80s and 90s look very similar to my physique. But if you were to carry on going 20, 30 years, they're absolutely huge. They're like bowls, you know what I mean? Thick waist, thick everything. And, you know, no matter what you do, you can't compare an Alsatian to an elephant. You know, and the elephant's always you're going to look at the elephant first, so you can't possibly win. But yeah, for me, I did everything I wanted to do, and I stayed true to what bodybuilding meant to me right to the very end, and got that perfect picture.
Cool. So I also mentioned that you have just finished a second book.
Yeah.
A second book project. Could you tell us a little bit more about that book?
Yeah. My second book was the one I really wanted to write, to be honest with you, and that kind of goes through teenage influence, all the pressures of kind of teenage life from early on. Like, I had a really bad learning disposition when I was younger, struggled reading, writing. I used to write with my opposite hand, upside down, right to left, and got absolutely tormented, beaten, battered by a teacher. And it's about that, and it's about your first movie influence, like Rocky 2. When you go back reading Rocky 2 and he's reading, he can't read, and he's doing that advertisement, and you get upset watching it. And for years, you've put that in the back of your mind. You forgot about it. And you think, why do I get upset every time that scene comes on? Why can't I watch it? And it's about the realisation of that, you know what I mean? And then it's about your mum steps up when you're young to put that right. And then as you get older, you get into breakdancing, and then that feels like the world. And then it's all these things that you do that either up or down, how you rise to them, how aggression rises, how you fight back. And then after a bit, the book then goes from the 80s where you've made it and you've done good at everything and everything's great, and then it tips on to working the doors where things go down again, you come back up again. With the final part of the book, it's about everything you've ever done comes back in later life. If you've made the right decisions, despite doing a lot of wrong things, it's about if you've kept to the path, you've kept to the dream, which comes back to the first book, everything you've ever done will come back to help you. You know, like, so I'm watching Rob Lowe films when I'm in my teens and I'm getting to parties and having a lot of fun. And he's the first book I read, and then next minute I've wrote a book. If I'm helping the kids and running youth clubs and everyone's into everything I'm doing, skating, breaking, when you get older you become a good dad, you know what I mean? Because you're used to being around kids, you know what fun is, you like having fun, you still like having fun. And then everything that's made your life, bad or good, even if someone's done better than you, they might not have your story. So your story makes your life, and then next minute you're writing books about it. You know, everything you've done wrong comes right, and it characterises itself in one place at the end. So that's what the second book is about, which, you know, it's a bit of God, a bit of everything, a bit of influence, and a bit of how everything comes together, you know.
Okay. Film seems to have had this kind of broadly a really important role in your life, not least in that trajectory to become Mr. Universe, but upon reading your second book, Life Addict, as well, it seems that, you know, you mentioned that you watched Back to the Future and then kind of got you into skateboarding. You watched some of the Brat Pack films of the 80s, and that got you into kind of throwing these house parties and having these kind of wild times in your youth, misspent youth. You saw Breakers on TV and then in some movies too, that got you into breakdancing. Film that seems to be really important in your life. Could you tell us a little bit more about how film's role, and especially its kind of role into that trajectory towards Mr. Universe as well?
Films are a massive influence, maybe for the fact because I couldn't read much and I didn't do any schoolwork, so everything was a film, you know what I mean? And the films that rolled into the Mr. Universe, obviously you got the Rocky movies, and that was a lot that his physique grew from movie to movie, which made it unbelievable. The fact that he was always an underdog and a bit laughed at, a bit wrong, a bit, you know, he weren't particularly clever, but then he stepped up and became someone. Obviously there's Youngblood, which was a big film for me when we were younger, and that's about, because that relates to you as a young lad, because he's young, you're relating to him, you're a similar kind of age at the time, and that shows a vulnerability to somebody who then steps up, which you relate to a lot more, you know what I mean? It's like Tom Cruise in All the Right Moves. He's got this vulnerability, he speaks up, he speaks his mind, he's a bit hard to deal with, and then he ends up coming through, and you know, and then the good thing with all these films, they end well, everyone does well out of them, you know what I mean? People come through, they step up, everything's muscle in its own way, you know what I mean? Even the 80s itself, it's about the little guy getting off with the cheerleader having more about it than what you think, and the 80s opens up to a lot of people's personalities and a lot of things that the 70s didn't, where all the guys were just hard guys, you know what I mean? Yeah, Burt Reynolds was a bit funny, but you never seen him soften from anything. He never got emotional, you never seen him crying, you never seen him upset. Gregory Peck was like a distinguished gentleman, but he never had a sinking level. And then James Caan, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, they were just hard people, you know what I mean? They had no beneath to them. So I think the 80s was all about, I mean, I think Stallone brought it on in the 70s, where he was a real heartfelt character who rose up, you know what I mean? In the 70s, everyone's clouting the women about and they got no respect for it. And then Stallone looks after his wife, and even when he tells it off, he goes in and he's got a soft approach to it. And then the 80s, I think, followed on with all that, with a lot of people and a lot of doors being opened on various people's personalities who rose up, who were just ordinary people who wanted to be better, you know what I mean? And triumphing through maybe harder-minded people, they worked off each other and they kind of come through at the end. I think that was the main thing towards bodybuilding.
Now, in terms of your kind of life and story, are there any kind of films, or you talked about TV, that really speak to you now, that kind of feel in terms of how the male characters have been kind of evolved, or do you think they have or they haven't?
I don't know, because a lot of the films now are just big budget Avengers, 16 Avengers with 20 Spider-Man off the side, 20, and that's all that's coming onto the screen. So you're having to look for the role models in smaller movies, but you're not, you know, I mean, I find myself, I'm watching Cobra Kai, which is an offspring of Karate Kid.
Yeah.
I've watched it 6 times with my son, you know what I mean? And I'm still trying to find that. They put on Stranger Things, which gives you this almost like Stand By Me, Goonies feel to it. So you just go, I've just gone back. I never really stepped forward. I don't think any characters in any film that I've watched recently has really stepped up to anything. You know, there's some good roles. I mean, you watch Joaquin Phoenix in The Joker, he's phenomenal, you know what I mean? I've never seen anything better than that. But he doesn't get a particularly happy ending, you know what I mean? And there's not enough of that. I mean, now if you've had a bad time, you go a bit aggressive and you go up, then you've got mental health problems. You know, that's what everything comes down to, mental health, doesn't it? You know what I mean? If you're aspiring for something, or if you're aggressive, or if you take a few wrong turns, you start questioning your mental health and this and the other, which is sometimes wrong, sometimes right, you know what I mean? But no, modern day stuff, I've not really seen anything like that. I mean, the last film that I aspired to was a film called Gattaca. Remember Gattaca? I thought that was really good. I thought it was the best, probably one of the most aspiring films I've ever seen. That's because he didn't have the genetics to do what he's meant to do, but he had the heart, and he beat his brother in that swim. His brother says, "How do you do it?" He said, I never saved anything for the swim home." And that was a nice thing. And then the even better part about that film is when he finally gets to space and where he wants to be, he says, "I'd already been to where I wanted to be because he'd met someone he liked." It was the path rather than just going in the ship at the end. He'd always done it through his story. And I think that's the greatest thing. It's always through your story. It's not the end result. It's not the tin pot at the end, or whether the title more important. You realise you found a lot more than that by getting to that. That's what's you. That's the dream. And that's the last movie which were really inspirational, with the odds end of Black Swan, which is a duplicate of yourself. You know, when you're trying to get ready for a bodybuilding contest, you're so self-obsessed, your mind's warped so much time, and even you're seeing that you are the Black Swan and you're the White Swan, you're both in everything, and you're obsessed to the point where you'll go to the point where you'll die to get to where you go. So there's just 2 stories in there, but they were, I mean, when did they come out? I think one was in the mid-90s, one about 2010-ish, with Black Swan about 2010.
Yeah.
You're asking
Yeah.
someone who
We're
should,
like going, yeah,
asking someone who should know but
2010.
probably does but doesn't. But yeah.
Yeah, but I think they're the last real films that have really come up with that. A lot of them don't do that anymore. They're just coming off the same thing. You got a million Terminators that don't mean anything. You've got the Marvel stuff that's not meaning much, you know, unless you're into it. Star Wars is just kind of, that's carried on, but then they've got in between stuff. It's just big money in the cinema, and there's probably are smaller movies that are meaning something, but you're just not seeing them.
Okay, thanks for that, John. So an extension from that really, on one of the modules that indeed we want to make this Q&A part of, we kind of make this proposition that the 1980s seem to be captured in an awful lot of the kind of muscle cinema that seemed to appear at this particular time, you know, the Arnie and Stallone flicks, some of the films you've been talking about. Do you think that there's this kind of neat relationship between the cinema of the 1980s and what was actually happening culturally in the 1980s as well, certainly in America, in the USA?
Well, yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it was the first time, I mean, the president were an actor, you know, so that was one thing. But yeah, but I think things were changing. And I think people more were opening up, especially in like the teenagers years. People were looking at younger lives and like differences, you know. Is that what the question you're trying to get at? Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
You go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, like say, even if we're going right up to date, like you talk about gender and this that, and the other. I mean, you watch something like Some Kind of Wonderful, and you have the blonde Mary Stuart Masterson character. You see her, and she's like some kind of tomboy, and they don't know what to do with her. And that kind of covering what might be seen as, you know, like a transgender type of thing now. And I just think everyone could be somebody, but As now, everyone's aiming, I think everyone's more aiming for an argument and protecting everybody. That was saying, don't be afraid to be who you are, but it's going to be a bit of a slog, but get up there and do it. And I think it was probably a brave decade of saying get up and be happy with yourself, like the Breakfast Club. Everybody came together, everybody realised they were all same, the beauty queen weren't so harsh, Judd Nelson, the bad guy, was all right underneath, was a bit soft underneath, and everybody had a little bit of something that they were trying to get to grips with and come through. And I think it was a good time for that, really. I think it brought teenagers up, and people were speaking out a bit more, people had bigger personalities, people did a lot more, and everybody were up to something. I mean, you were relating to all your Olympic athletes, you knew everybody, didn't you? Everybody, all the American, all the English team, upbeat, all the sports brands, Nike, everything would just do it upbeat. Rock music, Eddie Van Halen, Eye the Tiger, Survivor, all upbeat, muscle music. Everything was muscle, because if it was muscle in a bicep or muscle, that's people were growing as people. People are becoming happy with who they are. The music was upbeat. There was a lot of rock in a lot of these in these movies, and everything was sunshine, bright colours, and let's get this done with a little bit of a message. So I think that culture for me did it, because I said I know there was a lot bigger picture going on, and there might have been England against Russia and all that, but I never followed any of that. I don't know anything about that. Like I do today, I'd avoid all politics because there's nothing you can do about it. So that was me. It was just a film, and now I live my own life, which is, you know, that's how it always went for me.
Okay, thanks for that, John. And talking of 1980s and cinema, one of my favourite anecdotes, in fact, from your first book, Living the Nightmare, Becoming the Dream, is this bit. You mentioned when you were at school, you were involved in a kind of pull-up competition.
Yeah.
I think this was like on one of the sort of inroads into bodybuilding, ultimately.
Yeah.
And I'll let you tell the story. A certain film inspired you in this particular venture. I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah. So like. There was a chin-up event where I would be training all the time, and at the time I was very, very cocksure in myself, very happy with myself, probably too happy with myself, too arrogant, too egotistic. And so I said I'll do some chin-ups for St Joseph's Penny. We'll get a crowd around, we'll do the sports hall, and sports hall's all windows, right? So everyone's going to come and watch. So I've been training for a couple of years, for about 2 years, and I was big on body strength stuff. So I thought I'll do 50 chins in a minute. So I went to do it just thinking I was going to do it, walk away like, you know, thinking how the big I am. But unfortunately I got to about 43, 44 and fell off the bar, and everyone's watching. And that was the first massively destructive fail for me. Even though it seems like nothing, I was absolutely destroyed when I came off, because my films I've not took on board the downside of the movies when they lose and when they have to come back. I'd only took on the win at the end. You know, everything was very superficial. So when I dropped off this bar, I went down and people were looking and saying, we'll pay you anyway. I couldn't look at them. I felt angry. I wanted to lash out. I was that angry. And I went back and I just like half crying, half angry, half what do I do now? And then that night I just, for some reason I put Youngblood on. The Rob Lowe, Patrick Swayze ice hockey movie, and it wasn't the end that got me. On this time, it was the time when Rob Lowe comes back, he's given up, and his brother's giving him a lot of a hard time, saying you shouldn't have quit, you should have come back. Do you think your friend would have quit if he would have fell on the ice and this, that, and the other? And just as I'm watching Rob Lowe, and he's putting his trophies off, and he's angry and he's desperate, and he's got tears in his eyes, and you think that's where I am tonight, that's me now. So it was the ideal film for the ideal moment, and then he gets back and then he trains. And then from that second, I had a shed down the bottom of my garden from Dad built me, which had a chin-up thing, wall bars, weight. I just went in, did loads of press-ups and just did chin-ups all night till I died, till I thought, come tomorrow, you have to go up on that bar 3 times. I want to be fit enough to get up on that bar 3 times and try it with just the same effort as one. And then, so that's when I realised the down part of the movie, the part when you're on the bottom, picking yourself up, was more important than the actual result. It's about getting back up and doing it again and not quitting. So the day after I came in, I did the event again. It was packed, rammed end to end with people after school watching. And then I did the 50 chin-ups. And then I'm there flexing and back on my high horse. But I'd learned something, you know what I mean? And that was the thing of you don't quit. Like in Living the Nightmare Becoming the Dream, I talk about the bike when you're falling off, and you've got to keep getting on that bike till you ride it, otherwise you're not happy. With the chin-up event, it was the day after, I had to do it. And then when we talk about the Mr. Berry shows, it's about losing, coming last, looking like a fool, and then the year after coming back doing it, and then how long it takes to get through these shows becomes wider, more vast, and the consequences become greater and more sacrificial. But it all starts with, you start having that thing from the 80s movie where they win at the end. So you get on that bike, you ride it, you do that chin-up event, you finish it, you lose a Mr. Berry, you win it, you keep on doing these Mr. Britons till you finally get a top spot, then you carry on going until you get that happy ending where you can walk away and start something new and start something different.
Okay. Just going back to the second book for a second, the kind of thread of the book is this whole sort of journey you've gone through. It starts out biographical, you being quite young and you're getting involved in so many, part of the intro as I was going into this, you're involved in so many different areas, and there's this sense that you want to be the best every time you get involved in something. And again, just to re-emphasise the sort of stuff you've done here, you were a model, you were doing some touring circuits with that, you're a skateboarding champion, you were a breakdancing champion, you got yourself into some acting, and there was some decent credits there as well. Of course, this is all before you become this professional bodybuilder, and all the sponsorship deals and everything that comes with that too. And then, of course, you become this author, and again, you keep pushing yourself. You're on the third book now. What is it about this sort of life addict thing? What is it, if you want to kind of explain a little bit as to what's behind all of this urge you've got to be the best in so many different areas?
It's because you know how good things can be, and once you've got a taste of it, you want it again. It's like a drug addict when he probably first takes heroin will probably be so high he thinks, I want that again. But he can't keep getting that high because it doesn't come, because everything he's doing is taken away from his body. As a life addict is someone like when you first went into a club and I was ready to breakdance, and I was only about 7, 8 years old, but I knew I'd got good because I practiced for 18 months non-stop every day. And then I walked into a disco, and then I seen all these kids dancing, and then they were all a big circle. This was the first opening that I'd seen. And then I walked in, I had all my Nike gear on, and then my mate said, "Geez, John, they're good. Are you better?" And I said, "Yeah, a lot better." Went in and just blew everybody away, no Andy windmills, bouncing off one arm, flipping onto my back, spinning back onto my head and stuff like that. And then you blew away, and then that feeling, that boom, you know what I mean? It's a love for something, it's a passion, which you have to keep going with it. So breakdancing was that passion, it got better and better and better. Like when I said I watched Beast Street and we all got on the stage afterwards and we're all dancing on the stage, and we got a standing ovation in the cinema. And then even at the breakdancing, the good part was quite pure, because the competitions I got put in for, even though I won them all, I wasn't minded about them. I like dancing, I like being in the clubs, I like being in the crowds, I like being in the streets. I just loved it. And that's life addiction where it's good. And you don't realise that it can be stopped, where I almost went to secondary school, and it was from being the king of that school, you went to the first year of that school, from being in the thing that's cool and in, he was out of fashion. And so just as everything was about to pick up, he went west. So you get the smash on the floor, you know what I mean? And the next thing you know, people are picking you on your car when you're this, and then you're fighting in the schoolyard and getting suspended. And it's not really you, it's just that aggression, or not aggression, that excitement and that energy goes into something positive. But then when someone works against you and they don't like you, because as soon as you're off that pedestal, people want to smash you down straight away, and as soon as people stop caring enough, then people do, and then it's up to yourself to fight back to get it back. And again, and that's what it was. And I went boxing then for about 18 months, and I did all right at that, but I didn't like it. There was no upbeat optimism. The kids I was fighting with didn't like it, because you were fighting a bit different, even though you're outsmarting them, and I found it quite easy, but I just didn't like it. Didn't like it, nothing. And it was weird, because then I watched these Brat Pack movies, Rob Lowe, Tom Cruise, and they're having these wild parties and doing wild, crazy things. And I thought, just throw this big party, see how it goes. And then literally from throwing that party, your whole school life, like a movie, flipped around and everyone's talking about you. You're this crazy kid with no curves. And then skateboarding comes on the scene, you know what I mean? You're watching Back to the Future, Michael J. Fox hanging on the back of this truck. And the next minute, I want to do that, I want to get into it. And then you do it, and then it becomes obsession again. And then everything builds up, but this time you're into parties, you're doing it at a bigger school, you're you're older, you're more into these Brat Pack characters, and you got skateboarding going. And then I was always in the running teams, rugby teams, the school sports team. So then everything becomes bigger and better, and you're back in that place again where you want to be. You know, and again, you leave school and everyone gets into raves, drugs, this and it's not a place you want to be. You get into it because you've been with these friends, and that's a tide that takes you in the wrong direction. But then there's an addiction side to that you don't see coming, and then knocks you out, and then you get aggressive, you get horrible again. But this time you're not getting bullied, it's you that's the bully, because you're aggressive and you're angry because you're not in the right place you want to be in life, so you become the person you don't want to be. And then it's up to you to get out of it and then make life changes to come to something good. And then I say years on then when I'm into training, everything's going good, but I weren't winning after a bit. I find it hard to improve. Then the doors came up, working on the doors. But like from going out and everybody having a good time, everybody seemed to be wanting to cheat on everybody's girlfriend. Everybody wanted to be pulling from other relationships. So as I got into my early 20s, I thought, it's nice going out with different girls and having a bit of fun, but when people are with some people, you have a moral standpoint of saying no. And I hated it, and it got me all aggressive and mad, and and I just started lashing out. I had nowhere to go with that. I went on drugs, or bodybuilding, or doing right. I did everything. Where were it? So then working on the doors put me in this team position. And next minute you're like the warriors, like the outsiders. You've got this family again, and you might be fighting, but you're fighting for people who are willing to jump all over your head and throw you all over everywhere. But it seems right. You know what I mean? You find tranquility there. You find the people, and you think, I'm meant to be here. And the fact that nothing ever happens to you, nothing ever goes wrong when you could get killed every week, and you're loving it, it's a good part about it, and it's the next tide, and that's how the book goes, and how everything seems to build up for something to get good. And then when something's bad, but something's forcing in that direction, go with it rather than go away from it. Like just diversify. And then it goes on. Then with when I get obsessed with bodybuilding, I was too obsessed. It was wrong. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was obsession. And I said we had 2 miscarriages, and then everything went wrong with my wife, and then we ended up getting divorced. And then ended up living out in my car, and the obsession was that bad, where rather than find a place to live, I lived out in my car and made sure I had 6 meals. You know what I mean? There's something wrong there when you're making your food at work, you're showering at the gym, you're training at the gym, and you're sleeping in your car because you can't break off from this bodybuilding. Your wife lost 2 kids and you're so frigging selfish that you can't even see her problems. It's not that I thought we're doing wrong, it was the fact that I was that stupid that I don't see what I should have done right. And then finally, through a brief affair just on the last year of bodybuilding, she gets pregnant. And then I win the show I want, and then we slowly get back together. And there's your happy ending, super story. And that's what Life Ache's all about. It's just about lengthening it all, getting higher, getting better, working on what means to you, and then adding questions and accepting you're wrong, accepting when you're an idiot, accepting when you've done things right. And then as you get older, you've learned a lot, and you're so appreciative of everything that you've ever learned, and you keep putting it back. Like with your kid, when you're older now, I can look after do loads of stuff with him. I keep fit and healthy, and the nutrition I put into putting muscle is now just to keep himself healthy, lean, and I'd rather be like climbing trees and rock faces, get back on my skateboard, playing football, doing that. I'm not bothered about bodybuilding anymore. I can train 4 or 5 times a week, keep lighter, tighter, happier, look after my wife, be nice with people, listen to when they're down, know things, become into relation with things, work everything, so it's always good for everybody, and be less selfish, you know what I mean? And then you've got the God part of things, where if you do the right thing by everyone, then everything somehow comes right. So, okay. Good enough answer?
Yeah, great answer. Beth, I'm going to hand over to you for a bit, if that's all right.
It's all so fascinating, everything you've kind of done, and all these different, almost kind of different phases in terms of these passions of yours. Would you say now then that you're kind of onto your 3rd book and you're thinking about writing a screenplay?
Yeah.
Has writing now become
that's
one
passion.
of your...
Yeah. That's the 3rd part of that book.
Okay.
And it changed into writing. Once I got a lust for it, it was like preparing for a bodybuilding contest. It had to be right. And I weren't good at English, so I wrote in something, idiolect in it, where you write it as you sound. Yeah. And I was good at doing that. But my problem where I wrote everything like a script. It's in the present, and you have to put it in perfect past thing. And I was that bad at English. I said to my wife, I said, there's an end of a story here, and I want to start another story here. What? She went, that's called a paragraph. You knew what one word, didn't you, John? And I'm like, yeah, of course, yeah, you know what I mean? But even that was like, that ridiculous, what little I knew about writing. And then you make it your own. And so the first book, I got into that and really liked, I thought, say it as you say it. And, but obviously you've got to put it in a box of English, that's why you get ghostwriters. And then the second book, the woman who did me ghostwriting, she said, I know what you're doing now. In the first book, I weren't sure. She said, but this one, you write your own, you write how you write, and it comes across as you come across, and it's got a certain flow to it. And so, yeah, it had to finish brilliant. You know, I had to sound exactly as I wanted it to sound. Even if it's not perfect with everyone else, it's your version of perfect. You know, like with bodybuilding, it's your version of perfect compared to a trophy. You don't sell out. With this, you want it to sound the way you want it to sound, and you know, some people say you put too much of this and you put too much of that in. Some people loved it, but you think you do it the way you want to do it and get it right, and then you think, right, this is good to go. But I love writing now, and I love, even when I'm not writing, I'm writing. It's when I'm on my round, when I'm working, when I'm thinking, I'm writing. There's a story happening. That's how the first story came about. It was a story we're already there, and then it just opened up more. So however wrong or right you get it, it opens up more. But I thought get the two books together, then do a screenplay, which is, I'm putting that together in my head quite well now, and that's be about working the doors.
Okay.
But I want to play that myself. You know, if I go back in, I want to act it myself. So if someone wants to do something with the other parts of the book, they can do it and they can act it. But as a doorman, a former doorman, which was a big deal as well, you know, as big as bodybuilding. In fact, there's more good memories of working the door as there is bodybuilding. I'd rather play myself. But even if I always felt like I seemed a lot older than everyone else, like I'd been around forever. So you almost felt like you were 40s into your 50s. As now, when it does come, if it's another 2 or 3 years, I'll be into my 50s. So you just write about an older doorman who's in his 50s and try to get that on board. And then meanwhile, everyone said, get a book which has got a lot of nutrition in, self-help stories, channeling how to overcome things. So I'm going to do that as well. But I love writing now. It's because I've got to look after my son. My wife works nights, so I'm looking after my son in the morning. I pick him up after school. I've got an hour in the gym. So I get up at 4 o'clock every morning like I would have done for my early morning aerobics when I was bodybuilding, and I write or I read. And I keep that time open every day, between 4 or 5 every day, and I don't stop. It's always there and it's always working. It's not, the passion can change, but you just never lose it. People give up on the passion. They might not have nowhere to go with it. Like bodybuilders go on way beyond the time and they end up old, unhappy, too many sacrifices, and they've not seen the big picture. The big picture is your family comes first. Your son, your wife, that comes first. You've got to do jobs, you've got to work hard, but you can still find place, you can put everything in. You can get everything in. And I love writing, so the only time I can't, if I sit at the night writing, 1 minute Michael, I'm missing out with him, which I don't want to do, I never want to do. So if I do it while he's in the bed in the morning, go to bed a bit early at night, I can fit everything in. And we can still go out and do stuff, we can go to every park, we can play every game, you know, we can go out when it's nice, we can play his Xbox when it's not, we can do daft things and all fun stuff and watch stuff together at the end of the night. It's all about that, and it's about compromise with everybody and how everything, you know, you can fit everything in if you're willing to do it, if you're willing to eat well, sleep well, do everything right, you can do all the right things. Yeah, but yeah, I love writing, yeah, it's my main thing now.
Fantastic. And so you've got a real disciplined approach then in terms of your process as a writer.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in like kind of your process, and as you talked about making all these notes at the beginning in terms of what you were going to write about with the first book, for example.
Yeah.
How did you make that kind of choice about what to, when you're writing about yourself especially, what to keep in? And then also when to kind of dramatize for like, to make it kind of, you know, we write about real life, but there are certain, you talked a lot about this kind of structure, kind of finding the obstacles, building, payoff. So how do you make those choices about what to take out or leave in, and then how to kind of?
Well, sometimes, I mean, like in life, everything might be going bad for a bit, and then when things start going well, there's still things that are going bad. So if you're writing a book, in my opinion, you can put that there and that there, and then put everything in the bad pile, and then put everything else in the good pile when it comes good. So, like, even a movie, it's got like everything's busy at one point when it gets good in it. You know what I mean? They would still have bad points, but you don't want to see that. So you keep it busy. You keep that part busy. When it's building up to the climax, the thing you're most trying to talk about, like, so there'll be more door stories in the second one, but you don't want to overdo the door thing. Like with the bodybuilding thing, you start talking about the shows and trying to get different aspects that come off from them different things that build up to something more. And you don't have to put, people add too much stuff in, they put too much detail in, where like an 80s film, you can miss a bit of detail and still get the message across. So keep it fast paced, keep people thinking, keep people reading, keep bringing them in, keeping it better. Talk about how you felt at the time, how upbeat it was, how great it was. So I can talk about wicking the doors, how dangerous it were, but I can also talk about it was fun. We was like, you know, when we all had our blue plastic jackets on and we had our things on, and I do an army relation to when I was in the Fusiliers, which meant nothing to me, to when I had a brown clip-on tie, a plastic jacket and a Lessie boots, and we were working in nightclubs and throwing everyone about, you know what I mean? It was that same, you've got to get it in that everything's good kind of fashion. And then it's the same thing years on down the line where you're having this perfect holiday and it's the perfect romantic scene, but it's similar but in a different format. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, definitely. Like, kind of thinking about how you tell that story and how, you know, when you kind of know it so well as well.
Yeah.
Creating that distance from it in order to be able to kind of communicate it.
Yeah.
And do you find now then, so if you've written kind of 3 novels and three books, and now thinking about, they're all kind of books generally kind of much more descriptive, isn't it? It gives you the opportunity to do that, whereas you think about a screenplay, that's much more of a visual medium.
Yeah.
How have you kind of tried to navigate telling your stories in those 2 different forms? Do you find any differences then when you're doing that?
No, because the first book, I more or less told the story, but the second book I've wrote a lot more like a movie.
Okay.
So a lot of it is actual dialogue, because I like being in the moment rather than talking about the past, because you want to be in the moment. So the second book is massively dialogue based, so I'm already coming into it and it's like things happening for a reason, which will coincide with writing a screenplay. But with a screenplay you've got to get everything in the present tense, which is how I write. But then you're going to have to write a lot. I mean, as I say, I've not started dealing with it properly. I'm just getting the story and the characters and how to backlog it. But you're just going to have to, I'm going to have to learn how to do it. Like I learned how to write, like you learn how to do everything. Start at the bottom, get a bit of advice, but just go anywhere. Just do it. Just get on and start writing it. And I say everything's forming in my mind now. In the next couple of weeks, I'll be writing. And then after Christmas, it'll just go bang, and then that'll be it for the next 2 years. And my thing in my head I want this kind of self-help book, which I can write as a bit of fun, because it's just little bits of stories about how to learn. But the screenplay is going to be the challenge. That's the one where you're going to go back to basics, back to saying, right, well, where's this person? So you're already writing, like in a book, a backstory about somebody. How do we put that in? How do we know who this guy is? How do we explain it briefly? Or if he's a big character, how do we get him in? How do we do that? The scenes are all right, because I always talk about the scenes before I introduce who everybody is, and then we get on with the story. And again, a lot of it's in dialogue, it's in present time. So I don't think it should be that hard. I mean, I think everything comes back to what you know. I mean, if you know, I say everything happens for a reason. If you go back to your earliest memories, I was playing with Star Wars toys, going, hey man, blah blah blah, hey, and you've been doing scenes since you know what I mean. And then I've acted for 4 years straight, and then another 2 years later on. So I know what things sound like. I've watched a million films, so I know how they go and how the script goes. And I've got my own story, which I want to base something on, but I'm going to do it fictional as well. It's going to throw a lot more in, because you've got to keep it a lot more interesting. So I've got a lot of ideas which will go wrong, which I know they're going to go wrong for a while, but like the message of everything you've ever done, in the end you've got it right.
Yeah.
And whether it fails or succeeds, you've done it anyway. You go through life and you get to 60, 70, think, I've got no regrets, because I did everything. I talked to everyone I could. I put everything I wanted to do, and I love doing it. So whether you make money, no money, get to act it, not get to act it, get picked up, don't get picked up, you've done it anyway and you've enjoyed doing it, which is the main thing.
Brilliant. And my last kind of question then we've talked a lot about kind of films of the 80s and their influence on you. How much do you think that that's going to have, how much are you going to take that influence of those films that had such kind of profound effects on you into your approach then to writing a screenplay? You know, are you going to be thinking about those films of the 80s? You talked about Stranger Things and that kind of cycle of films that we're seeing at the moment, or series is.
Yeah, well, it's going to be probably more like Cobra Kai, won't it? Because you're going to be this older guy, so you can relate to that straight away, and you're going to have the same old values, and you're going to have young people coming up, and you're going to do daft things, you know what I mean? And but then you want to have a moral thing to it all, you know what I mean? Where you can put your own stories in, even try to find a correct context to get it in, and just try to find how it all works. As I say, I can't say what I've done because I've not done it yet. But you know, it's all just buzzing around and putting it in. But yeah, it's all going to be that kind of moral dilemmas, upcoming. You're going to be relating to yourself as this older character with a past, but then you're going to want someone who's similar to you coming up anyway, someone who you met who weren't like you, who were influenced by you. You're going to put all these characters in who you know, but in different names and different situations, and work through different things, and a few side stories away from working the doors, you know, kind of things that you've had to work through, bad times you've had to work through, and put them in a different context, but how you get through them in the same thing, and just work through it and try to do it, not in a film, because I think films go too quick. I think try to get in a series, even if you're thinking of five series or something like that, work it like that, and then just see how it goes, or even just keep writing it, and then just break off every time you get a little ending to everything, see if that'll be a series. But at the moment it's all up in the air, it's to be worked on, but I will do it. You know what I mean? I'm not going to do it.
Don't doubt it.
It will get done. Yeah.
That's exciting.
Very good. Right, just one sec, folks. I'm just going to get my next set of questions. These are from students. Okay. So, John, this is a question from one of our students here who says, 1977's Pumping Iron put spotlight on the world of professional bodybuilding and, of course, the Mr. Universe competition as well. Would you say that the kinds of competitiveness between figures like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Farino, of course, were still present when you were competing?
I'd say more so, because Arnold wasn't as bad as what he made out he was. He talked about moulding Franco Columbu and he had him like a baby, but in real life Franco Columbu was the more intelligent one who helped Arnold. And a lot of them scenarios were set up if you like watch it afterwards, you know what I mean? And like Lou Ferrigno and Arnold, and he's winding him up, but then as soon as he got a shot to play the Incredible Hulk, they said to Arnold Schwarzenegger, do you want to play Incredible Hulk? We want the biggest bodybuilder there is. He said, I'm not the biggest bodybuilder, I'm the best. And then he said, Lou Ferrigno is the biggest bodybuilder. And that got Lou Ferrigno the part of the Incredible Hulk. Right. And because Louis were deaf and dumb, it was a perfect thing for him to plateau. And Arnold wasn't even big at the time. He wasn't even a film star. And he was trying, but he hadn't got anything, and the Hulk was huge. So in my life, we had rivalries from the word go. Even the Mr. Berry competition was a big rivalry, because that's when your dreams are your highest. You know, because you're young and you're coming up and you've got these little physiques, you're thinking, we can still be the best. There's nothing ever going to stop us. We're going to be dedicated. You got all these films, you got all these, like you're watching all the Mr. Olympia competitions and all that lot, and they're all obtainable back then. They had nice little shapes. They were something like 12 and a half, 13 stone, something you could get to. And you had rivalries from gym to gym. Sylvester Derby's was a proper rivalry, and that under-18s show we went for was everybody were in it to win it, you know what I mean? So, yeah, and then later on, I talk about another guy I've got a problem with, but about the 2001 part, you've got people coming to you who you're training with, they're training with, they want to beat you in the weights because you're winning the stamina strength contest, and they want to beat you, but they're going really underhandedly to try to beat you because they've turned venomous, because you've been down there and they've been there, and when you come up and start doing stuff, they try taking you out of the picture in every way they possibly can. So yeah, it was. I was in a part where there's parts where it was venomous, you know what I mean? Yeah. But then towards the end, everyone was just there for me. You were just like the guy at the gym, and everyone liked you being on the top because you always helped everyone out. I mean, it was nice because when you're competing, you could be a bit nasty, a bit off. Everyone understood you, because when you were on, you'd help absolutely everybody. You know what I mean? I've produced about 6 or 7 British champions and world champions. You know what I mean? And even like cyclists, runners, motorcycle sportsmen, stuff like that. I help them all out, I help them out for free, and they all win. You know what I mean? So it's, you know, but yeah, the rivalries were quite harsh, ridiculously harsh, to be honest with you.
Okay. I've got another question here from a student who says, what kind of films would you say were inspiring you at the age when you first began to take bodybuilding as seriously as you did? And they put, was it the Stone Cold classics from Stallone and Van Damme and the like, or figures that may not be so well known anymore?
I think the first one was Rocky III. I think that was the first bodybuilding film, but I'd already seen it on a magazine. I'd seen a picture of Sammy Benoot when I was 5-6 years old at a friend's house, and that was the first. I looked at him and he was chiseled. He looked like a perfect man. He had this girl on his arm, the sun was shining, and that was it. That was the dream. That started right there when I was 5, and that was magazines. And he just gave me this. He said, "John, you look at them all the time, so take them with you." And it all that came from Lou Ferrigno and The Incredible Hulk, because I was that young. I thought Incredible Hulk was real. You know what I mean? Before you even realised what a film star were. Oh. So I'm thinking, wow, look at Incredible Hulk. And my mate's going, you know he's only a bodybuilder, don't you? What? No, look at him, that's him. Look, he's a normal man. All right, okay. So then I went to his house and started flicking through magazines. And then after that, I remember watching, it's like, I think it's an off-take of Pumping Iron. It's when they did this, you know when you go to like an art museum, you got all the sculptures, all the Greek gods. They had like Frank Zane, Ed Cornier and Arnold Schwarzenegger on these plateaus, and they was holding like that, and these things going round like they're made of stone, and they're just admiring them. And that was the first thing, and I thought, geez, these people are unreal. And I seen every picture of a bodybuilder, and it was like, wow, every guy who had a bit of an arm on him. You know, I see my cousin who had a bit of a chest, who was a bit ripped, and everyone a bit big. Wow, you're ripped, look at him, he's got abs, look at him. And it's everything were excitable, you know what I mean? And then you got onto like Rocky, how he came in Rocky III, and you're like, wowzers. So I watched that film, God, I don't know, 1,000 times, it's got to be. It's got to Nantes every single week. She let me pick Saturday's film, and every week it was Rocky III, you know, and that was it, you know. And then every physique were like, even the Brat Pack, they started getting physiques because everything were about a physique. So everyone's looking good, whether it's Swayze, Cruz, Arnold, Dolph Lundgren, everyone. It's all about physique. So yeah, massively the Rocky movies. Definitely Rocky III and Rocky IV more than anything else. Because Arnold was just always good, weren't he? He was the end prize. He was just something you were never going to be, you know. But you just looked up to him. He was just the king, you know. Yeah. That was it, you know.
So it's another question from a student who says, figures like Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler are among some of the most recognisable figures in the bodybuilding scene because of their success at Mr. Olympia. Yeah. With those kind of huge brand deals that came with it.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself getting approached by anybody who wanted to do a kind of deal with you off the back of some of the successes you were having in bodybuilding and other areas of your life?
Yeah, I got a lot of offers of different sponsorships, but never really took them on because they wanted too much from you off season, and because I was so, it had to be perfect. I didn't want to get pictures off season looking rubbish. So I said, you can use me photos, but that's about it. They didn't really want to know that. I didn't want to go to trade shows. I didn't want to stand there half baked. So a guy called Arthur Furris picked me up for Ultimate Nutrition, and he also did Eddie Elwood, who was the major Mr. Universe, the major overall Mr. Universe, and they had some other good guys, one of the biggest brands there. So I stuck with them for 4 or 5 years, but still, I never stripped down for anything unless I were ready for a contest. And even then, I go to a mirror beforehand, pump up, and I'd have to be perfect for me to be happy with myself. So I did well for him. He just must have been a really nice guy who liked me to do what he did, because no other people would do it. But all these other guys go to trade stands and they're standing there, they're happy. But I mean, they're huge, you know what I mean? They're like that all the time. So they're just, even if they're out of shape, they still look good. As I felt I always had to peak to look good. I always had to do everything right. So I never took too much on. But the brands them guys are on, they're on a lot bigger money. But even a lot of top pros, top 10 Olympia, don't make enough money to keep in bodybuilding. They have to retire quite soon, or they sell their houses and the cars just to keep going, because even at the top level, there's not that much money in it. Okay. So I think it's a tough thing to make money at.
Okay, my final question, and I think it's thanks for that, John. I think it's a really, really important one. Is throughout both the books, there's this sense that you've got, as you're growing up, you've got a very sort of acute sense of what the right kind of masculinity should be. It feels very sort of physical. It feels like in order to accentuate masculinity, it's about going to the gym and having these kinds of successes as well in other areas. Now that you're older, if you forgive me for that, but now that you're a bit older and you're a father, what does masculinity, or what does the kind of right kind of masculinity mean for you now?
You just get on with it now. It doesn't mean anything. I train 4 times a week because I enjoy training. I don't have to be necessarily big. I want to keep in shape. I want to keep myself happy, but it doesn't mean anything because people are usually chasing masculinity, still chasing, trying to be some tough guy, still chasing. It's because they've not lived it. They haven't done enough for themselves. And when you've done everything to every level that you've done, you know, I've done all the martial arts classes, I've run my own, I've with a daughter for 26 years, I've trained harder than anyone I've ever known, and it doesn't mean anything. I just want to be friendly and happy with people. It doesn't mean anything at all. You look after yourself, you be polite, you put everything back in, you go with your own, how you feel, and if people want to come on, you know, have a go at you, whatever, you just rise up for that minute and then drop back down to who you are and just keep being who you're being. You go back to that child you were when you were fun, you were happy, you did things, you know, be a good dad, be a good person, be nice, enjoy every day, enjoy, you know, like when I'm on my Porsche round, everyone talks to me. I'm used to talk to stupid, bad jokes, you know, still messing about thinking you're cool when you're too old, and jump on a skateboard, fall off, fall out of a tree, doesn't matter, still do stupid stuff, and you just gotta, I said, get rid of the image. If you can get rid of that image, shed everything you've done, and just be who you are, then you're on a winner, and I think that's where I've come. I'm really happy with that I've finally got rid of all that. That's part of the book, where it's always getting rid of that ego and that pride. It's always there to step up to something. And now you just do it for yourself, like writing, you're not competing against anybody. When me and my son, like, we'll go thinking I might take on a rock face without wearing anything, and I'll just climb up because I want to, or we'll jump off zip lines. Like, you gotta do it with no hands, you gotta do it, you try to flip over, you gotta, you know, trampoline, you try to do a backflip off something. And it doesn't matter if it ends in disaster because you're not bothered anymore. You're not bothered. I'm not bothered if I get on a scooter at, you know, nearly 50-year-old and just mess around, or on a skateboard. I don't care if people see me, because if you're polite, you're nice, you think it's the biggest self-defense, biggest amount of masculinity, because I mean, if you can look after your son all the time, put a lot of time in, be a proper father, go to work, do a proper job every day, do all your hobbies and interests, and not be interested if it makes money, if it doesn't. It means that you're doing it for the love of it. And in the end, you get the better story than anybody else because you found yourself. And that's bigger and more adaptive than anything. And like, you go back and you see some of these bodybuilders over Facebook, or people who've done a little bit of something, they're still hanging on to that too much. And I think, you can't be happy doing that. You know, I'm glad I'm not like that. And so when you're glad at where you are and who you are, then I think that's the winner, you know what I mean? And you just do things for the love of it, really.
Okay, I think that's a perfect place to end.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that, John. If we give a mini round of applause
Thank
here.
you very much.
Much appreciated, and yeah, we'll keep in touch. We'll see how the progress of your next projects go. It's been lovely to speak to you today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.